So this is going to be a short demo of a typical construction workflow with SketchUp, with a particular focus on how the new features of 2025 can support that, can be added into that. I'm going to start with the Revit importer. Going to import a Revit file as I have been able to do with the SketchUp Studio license for the past couple of years, simply by selecting an RVT file and hitting import. The difference now in 2025 is, however, up pops this window where we get to choose between the 3D views in our Revit model what we want to import. So it gives that greater level of control to users over what gets imported and how they want to work with their Revit models, which is really great. From there, of course, we can start setting out, planning, visualizing a construction project using scenes, elements from the 3D warehouse like this crane here, setting out storage zones and logistics on our site, so where vehicle access is going to be, so on and so forth in the typical workflow that we have seen many times before. A new really great feature of 2025 that I particularly love is the ability now to save out and reload to Trimble Connect directly from within SketchUp. So here I've set out a zone for my site office. I know vaguely what size and where I want it to be. I can right click, save out to Trimble Connect, hit save out, and I can continue working. Simultaneously, my colleague can then open that file directly from Trimble Connect. So Trimble Connect open from Trimble Connect, navigate to that model, open it up, and they can start to work on it while I continue to work on the other parts of my model. So for example, they start zoning out the site office, making sure there's enough space for a safety zone, for offices to go in, for toilets to go in, and so on and so forth. Another interesting update in 2025 as well is now labels, as we're seeing here, as I assign a label to a face, it's telling me the area. But now in 2025, those figures are dynamically linked to the faces. So if I start to alter the size of these faces, you can see that those figures are now dynamically linked. So again, if I manipulate the size of these areas, that number is changing. So it's making SketchUp that little bit smarter, which we all love. Okay, so my colleague has worked on this model. They hit File, Save, and as we can see up here in the top right, it's saving back to the cloud, right? Because that's where they opened it from. So that's saved back to the cloud. I've been working away on my model, but whenever I want to, I can now do reload from Trimble Connect. I can reselect that site office model, hit reload, and now it is loaded directly into my model. So it's a really great way of collaborating on different parts of the model at the same time, while giving autonomy to the lead designer. So from there, we can continue on this process of telling a story of a construction project using watermarks, more things from the 3D warehouse or our own personal library of machinery, animations, more labels and tags, and so on and so forth. This is made particularly easy by using an imported Revit project because the Revit importer organizes things nicely into tags. So as we can see here, I can then flick on my columns and my floors as I progress through this process. The next thing I want to highlight about 2025 is an increased focus on live components on the warehouse. So these are now subscriber-only content. They are technically out of labs. So for this example, I'm going to go and search for some scaffolding, and you'll see now that live components are pushed to the top of the search list, but all the same, you can look for them specifically by ticking their box in the filters list as well. So live components, as we know, are components that we can download into our model that are then configurable. So we're able to edit them using a series of sliders that you will see now in a moment. So I'm going to drop the scaffolding model down onto the ground in here and then start to configure it using this user interface that you see here. So I can very quickly make edits, whether that's bay height for my scaffolding here, number of vertical bays, number of horizontal bays, the length of each bay, so on and so forth, until I have it, the size, shape, dimensions, and even materials that I want it to be. So they're going to flip that to steel. Then I can grab it and position it exactly where I want in my model, which I'm going to do now. And so what I've done in this model is I've then repeated this multiple times, occasionally made unique for other areas, but each one you can then configure and edit in that super easy way. And now I have successfully, very quickly, without doing much building, scoped out exactly the area that's going to be taken up by all my scaffolding, and I'm able to visualize that, which means I can do more detailed zoning planning like we're seeing here, more detailed areas about where this bigger machinery is going to go and what the safety procedures are going to be on site as a result of that. So again, I can continue this process of building materials, building signs, zoning out, and really planning out exactly how my construction site is going to look. Now, it's not uncommon that using an architect's Revit model means that not all the information you need is in there. Architects often leave things out for aesthetic purposes or whatever reason, but when we're building things, we need to know everything. So what I'm going to demonstrate now is the importing of an IFC, which is going to bring in some extra information. There's a couple of improvements with our IFC import that we'll see now. So as we move this in, a little bit of manipulation and repositioning, we are going to bring in a structural model of this roof, right? So we've got a whole lot more detail here, including plank cages on the roof that we didn't see before. As of 2025, when we import IFCs, everything is broken out into separate tags, which is extremely useful. So turn off beams there, which makes up most of this roof structure, to be fair, but there's columns there as well and slabs. Similarly, repeated components are now repeated instances. So as you can see of this beam, there are 25 of them in the model. This makes the file size smaller. It makes SketchUp render quicker. It makes editing your IFC models easier. It makes organizing your IFC models easier. So it's a really, really great update. Similarly, for IFC export, there is a really important update to call out here as well, and that is essentially we now export IFC4 files. So previously it was just IFC 2.3, but now we can choose between 2.3 and 4 when we go to export, and there's improvements in the data organization of our exports as well. Something that you've probably come across is that when you make an import of something late on in a project and all of these new tags are now in your model, you start to realize some scenes that you had set up earlier in the process now have a load of unwanted geometry showing up in them. For example, we can see this roof structure back here in this scene where it's not wanted. In old versions of SketchUp, what we would have had to do is go through every single scene, reload, and update that scene, having turned off our tags. In 2025, a solution to that has been implemented, which I think is fantastic. So for demonstration purposes here, I'm going to flick off all of these IFC tags. Then I'm going to select them all. And then I'm going to go down to my scenes tab below, and I'm going to select a series of scenes. So those scenes we're looking at there before were excavation, delivery, and rebar. So these three here, we'll select those three scenes just for demonstration purposes. And what we're able to do then is right click on either the tags or the scenes panel now. And down the bottom, we get this option that says apply tags to scenes. And so what that's going to do is apply the current visibility of the selected tags to the currently selected scenes. This is a huge win, I think, for anybody who's working on models that are scene heavy, like this workflow that I'm demonstrating requires. It's a lot of scenes, a lot of scene organization. This is a really great update that people have been calling for some time. So really great to see that in 2025 as well. As you can see, we click through these scenes now, and that IFC file is not showing up unnecessarily where we don't want it. So now we have this extra information imported into our model because of the improved tag structure, the improved component structure. We're able to organize it and visualize it in better ways. As we can see, there's these plank cages that were just not present in the architect's model that we wouldn't have known about. But now, having been able to import information from different areas, we can go ahead and we can start scoping out the additional safety measures, fencing, additional scaffolding that's going to be required, and additional staffing that's going to be required for the construction of these plank cages. And so that ability to bring in lots of different kinds of files has had a huge impact on our work. Okay, ultimately, we're making this model for communication purposes to communicate with people and to, potentially win projects, tell stories. And so we want to make these impactful visuals. And the biggest update in SketchUp 2025 is the quality of visuals that we can create in-app. And this has been done through three features that we're referring to as the Visualisation Trifecta in SketchUp. The first of which was introduced in 2024, so we'll already be familiar with that. That is Ambient Occlusion. Ambient Occlusion, if you don't know it, if we take a little look at this Trimble scanner here, is essentially the creation of these soft shadows that add a depth and a detail to complex geometry. So this is ambient lighting creating a darkness wherever two objects get close together. So it adds a really nice level of detail, a depth to our visuals. So that was something that was released in 2024 that we'll have seen before. The next thing then, which is it's not in our styles tab, it actually has a whole tab of its own, is environments. So SketchUp now supports HDRs, sky domes, environments for the creation of image-based lighting. So as you can see, there's a series of environments preloaded into a SketchUp model that you can select. You can also import your own HDRs, create your own, and you have the ability under my Edit tab here to do a couple of things with them. So I'm going to just flick this on. So I'm going to flick the button there that says Use Environment as a Sky Dome. So as you can see now, I have this sky dome where we can see that sky in my scene. You also see there, I've ticked the box that says Set Sun Location, which means I'm able to move around the sun relative to the picture as well, so that we don't have to just make sure SketchUp interprets that correctly. We can choose exactly where our sun is going to be. And then we can also rotate that sky dome around. So we have really good control over what we want the sky to look like, where we want the light to be coming from in our images, which is great. And then there's the third one, which is Use Environment for Reflections. And so right now that's not doing a whole lot. But when we bring in the third factor in our trifecta, this is when this really takes off. So the third factor is SketchUp now supporting PBRs, so physically based rendering materials. Under our normal face style settings here, there's now one that says Display Photo Real Materials. And as soon as I hit that, you're going to notice a pretty big difference in the quality of the material and the rendering my image here. In this example, I'm using using this to a very basic level. I'm taking SketchUp materials and I'm editing them very slightly using some of the newfound attributes that we're able to edit in a material. So let's just take a look at what I mean by that. If I jump to the stone material that I'm using on the elevation of this building here and go into edit, you can now see I have these new attributes, which are metalness. So as you see, I click that on, that stone has immediately become more shiny and more metal. I also have roughness down below, which again just changes the level of detail and how the light catches these materials. So as you can see, if I turn that off, it changes how that looks as well. And normal, which isn't going to have much of an effect because I'm not using a fully PBR material here. I'm just using a normal material, but that is an attribute we have control over as well. If you want to get into using really good materials for this, the best place to start is the 3D Warehouse. Loads of really good PBR materials that not only can you control the metalness and the roughness, but they have bump maps. So you can then control the normal, which essentially is the depth of or thickness of the material. as well as actually controlling the ambient occlusion associated with the material as well. So when there's a bump map that gives the material texture, adding that soft shadows, that darkness that ambient occlusion does to materials, also then adds an extra level of detail. You can also build your own versions of these materials, and we are releasing an AI agent that can take any photo that you put in and turn it into a PBR material as well. That is currently in beta for people to test. So as you can see, I can make, even without going really far in on this, I can make quite beautiful images directly within SketchUp. You can see there the light shining off my curtain walling, the depth of the shadows, the depth in the materials is really, really nice, and that photoreal sky is just adding a real quality to the visuals I can create in SketchUp. So this, as a project leading visual, I think is brilliant. No requirement, if I want to make something of this quality, no requirement for additional rendering tools necessarily, which is great. Worth noting that now in 2025, every time you try and save, because it's going to ask you if you want to purge the assets in your model. The reason it's asking us this is because these materials and these environments take up quite a lot more space. They're quite a lot heavier, and so it's even more essential to purge our files as we go. So that's a pop-up that happens now anytime you hit save in a SketchUp model in 2025. Okay, finally jumping into layout to look at some of the updates there. As you can see, that those quality renderings, those photoreal materials, environments, and ambient occlusion is all visible in layout. So I can sheet up these really nice renders in layout, and as ever, these styles and effects are editable directly from within layout as well, as they always have been. So you can see I can flick on environments and control them. I can play with styles I've always been able to do, and turn on and off tags as I've always been able to do. So that's really great. Layout is also supporting the visualization trifecta. Jumping to another page. Here I've done a site layout plan taken from obviously that project that we've been looking at, called out a few pieces of machinery. And what I want to call out here is some improvements to tool functionalities, or actually the introduction of 3 new tools. So we now have a move, a scale, and a rotate tool. They're now individual tools. Previously, the select tool would have functioned as a scale, a move, and a rotate tool, depending on where you grab, where you put your cursor. The introduction of individual tools for these functions means that layout now behaves more like SketchUp. It's a bit more intuitive. The move tool functions better as the copy tool as well. So everything becomes a bit more predictable, becomes more intuitive to seasoned SketchUp users for sure. So now we can separately activate the scale tool, the move tool, and then also, of course, the rotate tool. We can also scale from a point with this tool here. And then the rotate tool functions just like the rotate tool does in SketchUp, making it really easy to use, making it that bit more familiar, and making layout that bit more similar to SketchUp. So it makes it more accessible to more people who are familiar with SketchUp. Jumping on now to page 4 to call out a couple of other things where I've done a nice big exploded isometric drawing of that IFC file that I imported. But first, going to grab this rectangle and use this new tool called Split, which essentially is going to break that rectangle down into 4 lines. More significantly, I think, actually, is the sister tool, which is join. So I can select a series of lines, these 4 lines that I did here, and I can use the join tool, and they will come together and become one object. Very simple example here using a rectangle, but in theory, if you've drawn quite a complex shape using a series of lines, this could be a really, really useful tool. Another thing that's been introduced in layout is the zoom window tool, which makes navigating and zooming into certain areas of a page much more intuitive and easier to do as well. So if you look at what I'm doing here, you just select a little window and it zooms in to that window that you've selected. I really like this. I think it does make navigating easier. And I think this, combined with our improved, more predictable ways of moving, scaling, and positioning, makes doing these little intricate details and intricate drawings in layout that bit easier and makes the whole process that bit better. Another thing to call out in layout is the ability now to export selected pages directly from our page tab over here on the right hand side. So I can just right click a series of selected pages and hit export, which means I can just export one. I can export non-sequential ones by selecting groups, which is really great. It just gives a little bit more control over what you're exporting. It makes it a bit easier to do. And a lot of people rely on their page organization for how they've organized their drawings. And so it's something that people have been asking for, and I think it works really well. Just want to sit on this drawing finally for a moment before we finish up, just to show that creating a nice drawing out of an IFC model that has been imported is a really great use case for layout that is being strengthened by SketchUp's ever-increasing interoperability capabilities. So this idea that we can import all of this complex information, simplify it and visualize it in SketchUp, and then use layout to create really beautiful drawings of it, I think is a really great workflow, and it gives a new lease of life to layout as well, I think, which is really great. Right, so that was a quick demo. I've obviously focused in particular on the new features of 2025, but in the context of that larger workflow. Really great visualization updates that gives a whole lot more detail to go into on those materials and environments as well. But yeah, enjoy 2025.